You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramée.
Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. Mark Dailey welcoming you here on board for this week's show, and what a busy week. Again, it's just me solo hosting the show this week. Kevin's still very busy with soccer today and everything that's going on at the FIFA World Cup in Russia. And guys, I'm a big soccer guy as well. Many of you follow my other podcast and my soccer work, and I'm absolutely loving the World Cup over in Russia right now. Absolutely unpredictable, some bizarre results, but fantastic. And it's the best time of year. I've been looking forward to this, I think, ever since the Formula One calendar came out for 2018. We've got the World Cup on. We're right in the middle of that. Group stage is coming to an end, and we're right in the midst of a Formula One triple header. The first time in history. We had France last weekend. We've got Austria this weekend. Weekend thereafter is the British Grand Prix. And then, wow, a week off in between before we have the German and Hungarian Grand Prix at the end of the month. What's up with that? But hey, I guess everybody deserves a day off now and then, and the same goes with Formula One. Just a programming note, at the beginning of August, when Formula One is on the annual summer break, we will probably be taking a week or so off ourselves when we're going to take our holidays too. Kevin and I have been very busy, not just with this show, but with many other things. So if we do sneak things or sneak away for a week or so, then, well, we'll try to come back as soon as we possibly can. Anyways, as I mentioned, there are plenty of things going on in the Formula One world, starting with news that the FIA is on target to release their 2021 engine regs later this week. Charlie Whiting had said that he was confident that these regulations would be published by the end of the June, which we are almost at right now. The basic concept and outline for the 2021 engines were released in November of last year, but since then they've been working towards the more detailed, basically the exact regulations of what the engines are going to be like. They're going to stick with the 1.6 V6 turbo hybrids in 2021 and beyond, but it's going to feature a number of significant changes, including cost reductions, a boost in power, improve the noise, and the noise thing I think has been an issue ever since the new V6 hybrid engines came out. I was at the Spanish Grand Prix in 2014, and it had been a number of years since I attended a Grand Prix in person. Being all the way out on the west coast of Canada makes it a little bit difficult to get to a Grand Prix because there's no tracks really close to here. Anyhow, I was really surprised at the difference, how quiet they actually were. I remember listening to the very first race of that year at Melbourne in Australia. Even on TV, I came across how quiet the cars actually are. They've become a little bit louder since then, but I know it sounds like such a trivial thing, but to Formula One, I think the noise and the sound of the power was really sort of intrinsic and part of the lure, the attraction to the sport. So it's good to see that they are doing something to improve it. One of the other things that they're doing is they are going to remove the MGU-H unit, which is the part of the hybrid system that recovers the energy from the turbo. They're going to relax fuel restrictions. They're going to up the engine revs by 3,000 RPM to 18,000 RPM. So that's, from 15,000, which is not a small thing, and that increase in revs is a bit to improve the noise. And they've been working, the FIA that is, has been working with the four existing engine manufacturers in Formula One. So that's Mercedes, Ferrari, Renault, and Honda, as well as a new engine manufacturer, which I think is absolutely fascinating. The rumor around is perhaps that is Porsche, which is, of course, a very well-known mark and a company, a brand that has plenty of racing experience. And I think it would be absolutely wonderful to see them come into Formula One. And that has been one of Liberty Media's goals, and they're the commercial rights holder for Formula One after they took over and bought out Bernie Ecclestone in unceremoniously kicked him to the curb about a year or so ago, was to make the sport more attractive for manufacturers, not only just for engines, but constructors as well. So it'll be fascinating to see who was actually revealed as this new fifth engine manufacturer. So we will sit here with bated breath and await the announcement as it comes later this week or perhaps early next week. And I really hope that they get it right. And this sort of dovetails nicely into other news that the 2019 aero changes are set to be signed off. And this is something that some people were taken quite by surprise by. I guess it was about maybe a month or 6 weeks ago that the FIA Formula One had basically forced through these aerodynamic changes through at the very last minute. They have a certain deadline in the year where they are able to do so without having to require approval from the teams. So Ross Brawn has confirmed that these aerodynamic regulations have been fully agreed to by the teams. And wow, when did that ever happen in Formula One? Formula One, we know, in the past has always been controversial. There always seems to be some sort of mega debate going on. And I don't ever remember hearing whenever the teams agreed on anything. Anyways, these regulations are going to be signed off at the next strategy group meeting on July 4th, which is the middle of next week. And that's interesting because when they came out with this proposal or announced the rule change, it wasn't really a proposal. They really forced it through at the end of April that there was a concept of simplified wings and brake ducts, which they really think is going to aid overtaking. They did find, after investigating and looking into it further, that there were loopholes in the proposal that needed to be closed. So this actually led to some really extended discussions with the team's technical directors, and they ironed out the details at a meeting of the technical working group last week. And the team bosses are actually ready to sit down, sign off on it. So that's a really, really interesting development, like I was saying. Braun also went on to say that the 2019 regulations are not only useful to contributing to what are going to be bigger changes for 2021 when the current set of rules and regulations expire, but he said it's also a test case in terms of cooperation between the Formula One teams, the FIA, the engineers that are led by Ross Braun and Formula One, to study future ideas. And I'm speechless. Guys, I'm literally speechless. Like I say, I do not remember any issue in Formula One that was agreed to so readily, especially when there seemed to be some initial blowback from the teams, a month or 6 weeks ago, whenever it was, that they, at first they weren't really too keen on the idea, but it seems to have died down. And Perhaps now we're starting to see the fact that maybe the teams are starting to work closer with Formula One. Maybe that there is some small signs of trust and cooperation, which we never saw in the Bernie Ecclestone era. I mean, we only just heard a couple of months ago that Ferrari was threatening to quit Formula One. And if you go back to the previous news section, and we hear that all the engine manufacturers are working closely with Formula One, and that talk has really seemed to have disappeared from the Scuderia, which again is amazing. Of course, we'll have to see how the rest of the 2021 regulations come along, and that's not only going to be what's happening with the cars, both inside and outside, but also what happens away from the cars, away from the tracks. I'm talking more about like the broadcasting, the distribution of the money that Formula One makes, and all that was historical status. That seems to be the big contention. And of course, this proposed salary cap, budget cap, or the cost reduction, whatever you want to call it, just a way to sort of rein in the spending and maybe try and bring a little bit of parity to Formula One. And of course, I think it's going to be all these things that ultimately will play a factor in who signs up for Formula One in 2021. And I'm not just talking about Ferrari, but probably the rest of the teams that are on the grid right now. But certainly very, very interesting that, like I say, the Ferrari talk of threatening to leave Formula One seems to have died down, and who knows? It could be promising to see a future where there is greater cooperation between all the entities and stakeholders in the sport. And I think that would be good for everyone involved, not just those racing in Formula One, but those in the media, the fans, sponsors. I think that it looks to be a very promising start to what could be a very promising future. So let's keep on the subject of the technical side. And Toto Wolff, the team principal at Mercedes, said he believes that the Ferrari, Mercedes, and Renault engines are very evenly matched. And he says that it's pretty close. That's what he describes the gap or the difference between them. And of course, this weekend, after delaying their upgraded power unit at the Canadian Grand Prix at Montreal a couple of weeks ago, Mercedes finally brought its 2.1 spec to Paul Ricard last week to the French Grand Prix. And well, was really impressive. Let's just put it that way. Lewis Hamilton was very dominant. Of course, he seized pole position. He led from start to finish, and he was very dominant. Of course, he was helped, of course, by Sebastian Vettel in the Ferrari taking out his teammate Valtteri Bottas at turn 1, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes. But, of course, since 2014, when the V6 hybrid turbos were introduced in Formula One, Mercedes has really been that gold standard, that benchmark that everybody else has been trying to reach. They've not only had the power, they've had the reliability, and they've had the engine that basically everybody else wanted to have. We've seen over the years, of course, Ferrari's been able to close the gap a little bit. Renault seems to be getting a little bit better. Honda, of course, is trying to catch up. We all know the drama that they've had with McLaren, so we won't get into that right now. We'll get into that in a minute, sort of. But Wolff admitted that although that they had some good performance, obviously, with the works car, specifically Hamilton, that he was concerned about the reliability, which affected some of the Mercedes powered teams. Force India, of course, having a bad day. Esteban Ocon, of course, did not make it past the first lap, but that was due to an accident he had with Pierre Gasly. But his teammate Sergio Perez retired later in the race, and that was obviously a real disappointment. And just to finish that off, and Wolff has said, quote, "I believe that all three power units are pretty close together between Renault, Ferrari, and ourselves at the moment. It's all about finding gains without compromising reliability. That's the trick." And of course, easier said than done. Improvements and gains on the track in Formula One and gains in performance are usually in the fractions of seconds, but fractions of seconds here or there add up. And of course, that's basically what it's all about. And you get a winning package with, like Mercedes had over the past several years, with a great chassis, a fantastic engine, and one of the best drivers of all time, and Lewis Hamilton. Well, history is just going to write itself, and that's basically what we've seen. 4 world championships for Lewis Hamilton, and 3 for him at Mercedes, 1 for his former teammate, now retired Nico Rosberg, and a whole bunch of constructors championships. So Mercedes have been getting it done, but interesting for Wolff to say that Renault is catching up as well, and. Well, we'll wait and see whether or not Red Bull made the right choice to part ways with Renault for 2019 and 2020 and choose the Honda engines. It could be one of these moves that's, if they pull it off, it's going to look like a stroke of genius by Christian Horner and the rest of the Red Bull team, or it could come off to be a disaster. And talking about disasters, yes, I hinted at it just a few minutes ago. Let's talk about McLaren. Eric Bouillier, the McLaren racing director, said that only works teams can win championships, and he admitted that McLaren is unlikely to fight for a championship as long as it is a customer of Renault rather than a works team, which is kind of interesting. I mean, they were a works team under Honda, and Honda moving forward is not with McLaren. With this year, obviously they're only powering Red Bull. Next year they'll be supplying Red Bull and Toro Rosso, but neither of them will be slapped with the works team tag. They will both be badged as customers. So I think that's kind of an interesting admission. And then McLaren, of course, is in the first year of an engine deal, which will take them up to 2020 with Renault. So we'll wait and see how that works. So that was after 3 years that they had a horrible outing with Honda. They just were not there in terms of performance or reliability when they came back into Formula One compared to the other engine manufacturers at the beginning of 2014. Obviously, some were better than others, but they were all much better prepared. The Renaults, the Ferraris, and the Mercedes were much more prepared going into the hybrid turbo era compared to Honda, who came in somewhat later in the game. But another interesting admission from Eric Bouillier is he believes that even though they're better off with Renault power in the short term, he admits that the team's problems are with the chassis. And that is a really big admission to me, because I think, you go back and look at what's been happening with McLaren over the past couple of years. And every time that there was a problem, well, I mean, some of the problems they did have were pretty obvious when the car was underpowered or blowing up in a big puff of smoke. I mean, that's pretty obvious that's going to be the engine. But when it came to the stuff that McLaren was producing in-house, they've been saying that their chassis was among the best in Formula One. And this year, when you see they have the improved Renault engine, they're not even close to being able to match the speed of the other Renault power teams, being Red Bull and the Renault Works team themselves. Renault, the Works team, of course, still in the process of this mid to long-term project to get back to the top of Formula One. Of course, they seem to improve each and every year, and this year a little bit better. I'd say they're kind of the best of the rest. I guess if you want to, if you have, not McLaren, they're definitely not at the front, pardon me. If you have Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull fighting it out for the top 3 spots, then I think that's fair to say that Renault would be the best of the rest outside of the top 3. And we'll have to wait and see how long it takes them to get back to the front there. But yeah, McLaren can't even match them. So to hear one of the bigwigs at McLaren actually admit that, and Bouillier said, quote, "The car this year is obviously not working exactly how we expect. We're still using this as an experimental experience." So, hey, I guess if you're not going to score wins, if you're not going to get podiums, and point finishes are far and few between. They haven't finished in the points since the Spanish Grand Prix about, 6 weeks ago now? Yeah, I guess it's about the middle of May. So, 6 weeks ago. So it's been a bit of a dry run. So it's... to me, that sounds almost defeatist, don't you think? From Bouillier, it sounds like that the team, to a certain degree, is admitting that this is not going to be their year again. So they're basically using it as an experience to evaluate the car and learn where they've gone wrong, because the aero upgrade that they introduced in Spain just does not work. Obviously, they got a good engine, the chassis and the bits underneath the hood away from the engine, just not getting it done. Anyways, moving along to McLaren driver Fernando Alonso says he hopes that Paul Ricard, the struggles are just a one-off. And talk about a change in fortunes in less than a week for Fernando Alonso. 2 weeks ago, he's in the winning team of the number 8 Honda. Shame on me. The number 8 Toyota at Le Mans, winning for the first time there, completing the second leg of this triple crown. Fernando riding on a cloud until he came to Paul Ricard. I can't believe that the same driver had 2 completely different fortunes in the same country, in the same sport, albeit a different formula of racing in less than a week. But he said Alonso is confident that McLaren will be more competitive in Austria after he was classified dead last at the French Grand Prix. Shocking. Another thing absolutely shocking. McLaren, they struggled all weekend for performance, and Alonso and teammate Stoffel van Dorn were both eliminated from Q1 in qualifying. And like I was saying, it was another, well, it's not a DNF, but it was another race where they didn't score points. So, basically kind of sort of, but not really the same thing. And Alonso summed it up by saying this was by far the worst performance of the year. So I really hope it is a one-off and not the normality. All right. Well, it's been long enough. Let's talk about the race itself. What an interesting and exciting opening lap. What a lot of drama between the first what was it, three corners. Of course, starting that race, we had Lewis Hamilton was on pole position. It was another Mercedes lockout with Valtteri Bottas starting in P2. Then we had Vettel and Max Verstappen on row 2, Ricciardo and Raikkonen on row 3. No big surprise that the top 6 spots were all filled by Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. But a decent performance from Carlos Sainz to finish or qualify in 7th. But the performance of the afternoon was by Charles Leclerc, the Sauber driver. 8th, qualified in 8th. A wonderful performance by the young Frenchman. Of course, that was helped a little bit by the fact that Romain Grosjean has completely forgotten how to drive a Formula One car and once again crashed, this time in Q3, ended up putting it into the tires. And his run of bad luck just continues. And, well, can we start the RoGro has got to go hashtag? I think that he's certainly living on borrowed time. Again, if you go back and listen to the show last week, we talked about how Zach Brown, the CEO at McLaren, was saying that they had received 3 inquiries about signing Lando Norris, who's an F2 and a McLaren contracted driver. He's leading the championship. Toro Rosso had inquired about getting him to replace Brendan Hartley for the rest of this year and part of 2019. McLaren said no, and I speculated at the time that the other 2 teams, if Brown is being completely forthcoming in his comments, were possibly Haas, who's had Grosjean has not scored a single point this year, and we're already a third of the way through the season, and his luck is just going from worse to worse. And of course, the other one I speculated on was perhaps that the third team that could possibly be looking into securing Lando Norris's services was Williams, because why not? They got 2 young drivers in Stroll and Sirotkin, and neither of them are doing very much at Williams. Of course, they don't have a great car either. Of course, Stroll, he had a puncture late in the race and did not finish. And then Sergei Sirotkin finished in P15, 1 lap down, just ahead of Fernando Alonso. So very disappointing again. Well, actually, Fernando did not finish the race, so Sirotkin finished dead last in that one. So again, not really all that great, but yeah, wow. Let's talk about the start now. Of course, like I said, you had Lewis Hamilton, but I thought it was interesting when they started, when the lights went green. Hamilton got off pretty good. Bottas got off pretty good, but Vettel, I don't know if he had the better car on the day. We're never going to know, of course, or if he just got a good slipstream down that straight there at Paul Ricard. But going into that first corner, he was right up on the gearbox of Lewis Hamilton. He was inside on Valtteri Bottas, made up that ground, stuck to the inside line of the track. Bottas left him a little bit of room, but was not going to give up that position. He was going to keep out front and keep his nose ahead, being wide on the turn into turn 1, which is a left-hander. He would have had the inside line for turn 2. Sebastian Vettel outbraked himself, locked it up, crashed into Valtteri Bottas, setting off a bit of a chain reaction, completely destroyed his nose, punctured Bottas's tire, damaged his floor. Both of them limped back to the pits and rejoined the field dead last, the 2 of them. But after that chaos we had in turn 4, we had Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon come together. So unfortunately, you had 2 of the 3 French drivers going out in the very first lap of the race, which was very disappointing to see. And then, of course, the end result in that was a safety car, which lasted for several laps. And then Bottas and, as I say, Vettel ended up at the very back of the field. But once things started going again, once they went back to racing, it was impressive to watch Sebastian Vettel, who had switched to the hardest compound tires available which was the soft tires. Of course, starting the race, Vettel had started on the ultra soft and the Mercedes cars. I believe both of them. I know Hamilton was on the super softs. I'm not sure about Bottas, but that also could have been part of the reason that Vettel was so quick off the line. But Vettel deciding to go for a long stint, and there was some speculation that perhaps he might be able to go the length of the race, but he really scythed his way through the field. He from 20th. By lap 20, he was already all the way up to fifth position, and the cars in front of him, well, they'd be the ones that you'd basically expect. You had Kimi Räikkönen and the two Red Bulls. I think Carlos Sainz was in there as well, I think at that point, and then he got past him. But once he'd got past everybody else that wasn't driving a Mercedes or a Ferrari or a Red Bull, by the time he was behind his teammates, Kimi Räikkönen in fifth, well, I think he was about 17 and a half or 18 seconds behind, and that was about as close as he got. I think that Kimi, of course, was he was lapping, or he had the softer compound tires, but I think at that point it was interesting because they were lapping similar times, like almost identical times. I noticed Seb on the hard not on the hard tires, but on the soft compound tires compared to what his teammate was running, and both of them had a significant amount of laps on them. But I kind of wonder if maybe Vettel had maybe took a little bit too much out of those tires too quickly, and was not able to go the entire race distance, and then ended up having to make a pit stop later in the race. And by that point, he was never going to make up any more ground. He was never going to get any further than that. And of course, at that point, or later in the race, we did see Kimi Räikkönen pass Daniel Ricciardo. It was looking pretty good for Red Bull at one point. They were never going to push Lewis Hamilton. Lewis was basically out there just having a nice Sunday drive, and unless he had a mechanical problem, then he was not going to lose that race, because I felt starting that race, I was saying before the lights even went green, I felt that there was a podium on for Max Verstappen. I just had a feeling. Seems like Max has got his head in the right place the last couple of races, and he's looked more focused, and looks like that perhaps he's snapped out of this funk and broke this run of bad luck and accidents and crashes and running off of the track that's plagued him all the way through the season up until Monaco. But he had a good race a couple of weeks ago in Canada, continued that on in France. So I felt he was good for third, maybe second. That was, of course, before Vettel knocked out Bottas. I figured that I just had a feeling that race was going to be, I just had a feeling Hamilton was going to win. He just looked very good in qualifying. The Mercedes obviously was running very well at Paul Ricard. I figured it was going to be Hamilton, Vettel, and I had a feeling that Max was going to finish third in that one. I don't know. I never really predicted how it would turn out for Räikkönen or Bottas or Ricciardo, but I was kind of sort of right. Anyways, Vettel, of course, he was the scapegoat for all of that, and rightly so. I was debating it during the race whether or not that was just a racing incident, but the more I looked at it, I was not surprised that he was handed that 5-second stop and go penalty for causing the accident that took out Bottas. And there was a lot of backlash from the Mercedes guys. Niki Lauda, being Niki Lauda, never afraid to voice his opinion, and he said it was too lenient. And he said, quote, "There's more time they can give him. That is what I mean. 5 seconds is nothing. He destroyed the whole race for himself and Bottas." Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, he's going to be biased, obviously being the non-executive chairman at Mercedes. But I don't know. I'm going to put it out to you guys. What do you think? Do you think that 5 seconds was the correct amount of time for a penalty for Sebastian Vettel, considering he got out of that incident almost scot-free? to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, fifth position was not the result that Vettel wanted for his championship hopes and his challenge. Obviously, now he went into that race leading Lewis Hamilton by a single point, and now he is dropped 14 points behind Lewis in the drivers' championship. But the thing is, and this is the big thing, is that even though he did have damage, he did more damage to Bottas's car, and you could tell the difference between the two of them fighting their way back up through the field, and that was the big difference. Valtteri Bottas only managed to finish seventh by the time it was all said and done, and that was 2 spots behind Sebastian Vettel. And you don't often see Valtteri Bottas finishing behind Kevin Magnussen in the Haas. So I think that Lauda is making a pretty good case for it. But I don't know. I think 5 seconds seemed appropriate. Lewis also mentioned after the race that he felt that it didn't really add up. He said that it was disappointing because he thought that Mercedes had the chance for 1-2. And that was the ultimate goal within the team, and that Valtteri had done another solid job all weekend, as he's done all year. So Lewis playing the good teammate. But the one thing he also didn't really dip his toes into is he was asked in the press conference after the race if he was surprised by the amount of incidents that Sebastian Vettel gets involved in, and he said he wasn't going to get into it. He said he knew what the press was getting at, but he said it was basically a racing incident and going into turn one, and those things can happen. And of course we do. We see it fairly often in races. You get all these cars, everybody's all revved up. Everybody wants to be that first car into the first corner. They all want to be in front of the car in front of them. And from time to time, things do happen. And but at least from Lewis's point of view, he said he had to really break deep going into that corner, because when he's looking into his mirrors, all he saw was a mirror full of Mercedes in one mirror, a mirror full of Ferrari in the other mirror, and he thought he was going to be rear-ended, and perhaps maybe to a certain degree, maybe unconsciously, he might have been relieved that neither Sebastian Vettel or Valtteri Bottas hit him going through the first corner. Because say that Vettel, who locked it up, hits Valtteri Bottas or rear ends Lewis Hamilton, and all 3 cars go out or at least run off the track there, that would have flipped the entire field on its head. I think you would have had at that point Max Verstappen, if I'm not mistaken, although he did have to take evasive action and have to kind of run off the track there. But let's just take that away for the second. I think we would have had the field would have been led by Verstappen, Ricciardo, and Kimi Räikkönen, if I'm not mistaken, at that point. I'm not sure if Kimi was in front of Daniel Ricciardo at that point. Probably not, but it would have made for a very interesting Grand Prix. All right. Well, what else was there to talk about in that one? Oh, yeah. I know what I was going to say is that I was, again, very, very impressed by Charles Leclerc. The young Frenchman finishing in the points in 10th. He was disappointed with that. Of course, he dropped a couple of positions during the race. He claims a single point off of that, which means another point for him, and he is currently 14th in the Drivers' Championship. I mean, that doesn't sound all that great. He's only got 11 points, but I think that's very, very impressive. Very, very impressive. His teammate Marcus Ericsson only has 2 points, which he scored at Bahrain earlier in the year when he scored a P9. And Charles Leclerc is, honestly, he's miles ahead of his teammate. And I think it's very, very impressive. I know that there has been these rumors that Raikkonen will not be back at Ferrari next year, and that perhaps Ferrari will do something that they've never done in their history and give a youngster like Charles Leclerc, who I believe is just only 20 years old, a seat at Ferrari. All right, well, let's talk a little bit now about Max Verstappen. We were just talking just now how impressive he was this past weekend in France. Again, a solid performance. Again, let's be fair, probably aided a little bit by 2 cars with better engines and better packages in front of them, in Vettel and Bottas canceling each other out, or Vettel canceling himself and Bottas out in turn 1. But Max, I'm glad to see him turn around. I've been critical of him and the mistakes that he's been making. However, I have sort of prefaced that with the disclaimer, if you want to call it that, that when Max is on his game and when he's driving to the capabilities that we know he is able to do, that Formula One is better with Max in there and Max being himself. But he did lash out at the media after the race, and when he was questioned by motorsport.com just about what he thought about Sebastian Vettel's crash. He jokes saying, "I think next time you see Seb, maybe you should tell him to change his style because honestly, it's not acceptable." So I think that's a great comment. Max obviously not afraid to stand up and defend himself because he's really come under a lot of scrutiny, a lot of criticism from fans, from media, even from within his own team, and that's been one of the things that perhaps he needed to change his style. So he went on to say that that criticism is what he got at the beginning of the year, and he believes that, well, perhaps jokingly, but perhaps maybe not so much. He said that if he's going to get criticized for that, then why should Vettel not be criticized for the same thing? And then so he went on to explain himself, saying that he doesn't think that Vettel should do anything to change his racing style. He should just get in the car, drive again, learn from what he did, and go on. He said that was his advice to not just Vettel, but everybody else in Formula One. And Max dropping truth bombs, being, I think, very mature sounding in that. And he said, he went on to say that you have to learn from your mistakes, but you can't change the way you approach Formula One and the way that you race. You can fine tune it, but change your style. How do you do that? It's impossible. I mean, if Max changed his style, he would not be Max Verstappen, and he would not be as much fun to watch as he has been over the past couple of years. And I think he's fair because he was frustrated, obviously, with what he called all the stupid comments on social media and from journalists. And he said he wasn't going to hold back, and because that's what he feels. And I think that's his right. That's his prerogative. And I thought it was good to see. I was glad to see Max step up and fight for himself. All right, just another note about the French Grand Prix, and I think this is kind of cool. The FIA is open to dropping the chicane that is on the Mistral Straight, sort of about half to 2/3 of the way down, and the theory is that it will improve the racing, and they've decided to look at it because the drivers that have raced or tested the circuit without the chicane in place said that there'd be more slipstreaming on the longer straight, and then with the lower downforce levels that the teams would be using during the race, turn 10 and the rest of the track would be more of a challenge. Of course, it gets quite twisty. There's several corners before they come back onto the pit straight, and that would be cool. Always up for things like that. Always in favor of measures that can be introduced to improve racing and improve overtaking. So hopefully they do, and hopefully it'll make a difference. And I just wanted to ask you guys what you thought of the runoff areas at Paul Ricard. Those painted strips, those white, blue, and red. Obviously also the colors of the French flag. I thought was kind of interesting. Of course, there are abrasive surfaces that are meant to slow down the cars if they leave the track, and of course the different colors, not only being the colors of the French flag, but also the different colors indicated different levels of abrasiveness that would help, that are designed to slow the cars down on this grippy paint that they use. But I found when I first started watching qualifying on Saturday, I actually found it a little bit distracting. It was a little bit kind of almost psychedelic, but this is just kind of like a little bit of a tangent to nowhere, but it does make for an interesting spectacle when especially you see the track from overhead and you see all the different layouts and the runoff areas. I think there's something like 160 different track configurations that they could use at Paul Ricard, which is a bit mind blowing, but very cool. But in the end, I think by the time the race was going and the different angles that they used for the television, it wasn't so much of an issue. But definitely a very different look from Formula One that we haven't seen in the past. All right. Well, no rest for the wicked. Formula One, like I was saying off at the top of the show, will be back this weekend for the second of 3 races here in this month of June and July. And there's news that they have added a third DRS zone at the Red Bull Ring. So they've been experimenting with the number of DRS zones this year about the concerns that drivers are facing overtaking in other cars. So basically, you'll have, if you can sort of picture the Red Bull Ring in your mind, you have the start-finish straight by the pits. It goes up the hill and goes into basically a 90-degree corner to the right. So along the start-finish straight, there is one DRS zone there. And then when you go between turn 2 and 4, well, there's a slight dogleg to the left after turn 1, halfway up, which is a fairly straight section. And then you go into another very sharp right-hander where Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton had a coming together at the Austrian Grand Prix a couple of years ago. And then you go, so that long straight section, that will be the new DRS zone. And then beyond turn 3 or turn 4, depending how you look at it, if you count that dog leg or not, that other long straight at the back there, that will be the third DRS zone before you get into the twisty section there. And of course, the Red Bull Ring is a fairly short circuit. The times aren't as long as some of the other circuits that we see qualifying last year at the Red Bull Ring. Valtteri Bottas qualified in pole position, and he set a Q3 time of 1:04.251. So one of the shorter lap times that we will see on the Formula One calendar. All right, well, it's time to start wrapping things up. Let's just take a quick look at the Formula One World Drivers' Championship standings. Lewis Hamilton back on top, leading with a total of 145 points. Sebastian Vettel at Ferrari in second with 131 points. Danny Ricciardo has now moved into third in the Drivers' Championship with 96 points. Valtteri Bottas is now in fourth with 92. Kimi Räikkönen, 83 points on the season, puts him in fifth. Max Verstappen is in sixth position with 68 points. Nico Hülkenberg, Fernando Alonso, Carlos Sainz, and Kevin Magnussen rounding out the top 10 in the Drivers' Championship. Kevin Magnussen is on 27 points, so he's got a lot of work to do if he wants to throw himself into the conversation. And of course, I'm just joking. Anyways, looking now on the constructors' side of the championship, Mercedes still in front, leading the constructors' championship with 237 points. Ferrari not really all that far behind, still in touch. Second place, 214 points. Red Bull third place with 164 points. And then Renault miles behind, 62 points. McLaren 40 points. Force India 28 points. Haas Ferrari 27. Toro Rosso 19 points. Sauber Ferrari with 13. And the very sad figure of Williams with 4 points for the entire year. Anyways, before I go, I just want to thank everybody who listens and downloads this show. I know over the years, the schedule has sometimes been a little bit erratic. We've tried to stick to a more regular schedule and release at least one show per week, 2 if time and permits, and if there's enough news to talk about, which there usually is. The show has been growing. We've been getting more downloads, and we've been surpassing ourselves each and every month. So I'd like to thank you all. Of course, if you want to help us grow the show, you can always leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, wherever you listen to the show. And I just want to make a shout out to Boris Posavec, who weighed in on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Scuderia F1 Pod. And Boris says, listen to your podcast recently, maybe the best F1 podcast out there. Just please don't say Michael Schumacher anymore. He is Michael Schumacher. So, okay. Fair enough, Boris, but agree to disagree. I'm a little bit too English in my pronunciation, so maybe we can find a little bit of a common ground. Why don't we just call him Schumi and leave him at that? Michael, of course, one of my favorite Formula One drivers of all time. I was a big Schumacher Schumacher fan back in the day, and especially when he was at his peak in Ferrari, when they were winning all those championships and all those constructors titles earlier in this millennium, not even this decade anymore, earlier in the millennium. So thank you very much for that, Boris. And of course, thank you all very much for listening to me, or listening to this program, of course. If you want to get in touch, leave us a message on Facebook, send us an email, scuderiaf1pod@gmail.com, or tweet us at scuderiaf1pod. And that's it. That's a wrap. Look forward to the Austrian Grand Prix later this week. Free practice gets underway at 11 a.m. local time at the Red Bull Ring in Spielberg, Austria. And I can't wait. Any weekend with Formula One is a good weekend. And until next time, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.